That's where I'm supposed to check in? I don't believe this.
You don't? I was gonna ask him to the fall dance.
Hi, I'm Mrs. Garrett, the school dietitian. You must be Joe, the new student.
Right, how'd you know?
Easy. I've never seen a motorcycle parked in my flower bed before.
I thought they were weeds.
This is Eastland to Langley, a Facts of Life podcast. I'm Karen Ben Singer.
And I'm Scout Kirkpatrick.
And this is a podcast about the 1980s television show, The Facts of Life.
Here we are.
We are doing our very first main feed episode. We have done a 0 episode and we did a Patreon episode, but this is the first one for the main feed. I am very excited.
Me too.
I mean, really, a Facts of Life recap, rewatch, revisiting podcast is what this is. Ooh, revisiting. I like that.
Yeah, because, you know, it's been in the zeitgeist for so long, a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar with it. It's a revisit for everybody.
Great. Every episode, we will be watching an episode of the show. We are starting on the main feed with season 2.
For reasons.
Yes, 4 reasons. Not for 4 reasons, but 4 reasons. On our Patreon feed, we will be doing all of season 1. The primary reason we are separating these out is because this show was reworked moving into the second season to become the show that most people are familiar with. Mm-hmm. So we figured we'd start there. It's kind of like when someone tells you, you really need to watch this show, but the first season is kind of not what the show is.
Right.
And then you're like, well, do I sit through season 1 and decide if I like it, or what do I do? So we're gonna do the thing that I actually don't like doing.
In most cases, yeah.
I'm usually a narrative purist and I like to start at the beginning, which I guess with this, though, we still are. We're just doing it in a separate piece of this.
Yeah.
So we are starting with episode 201, or season 2, episode 1. It's not episode 201, but there are 201, I think, regular episodes of this show. So we will get to 201.
We'll get there.
So you have all the details on what this episode is, so why don't you go ahead and take it away?
I do. This episode is titled The New Girl, Part 1. Like you said, it is season 2, episode 1. That's also, the production code is 201, so it was filmed first this season. It was directed by Bob Claver, and it was written by Jerry Mayer. He also wrote on Bewitched, and he produced Punky Brewster.
I love Punky Brewster.
I know. I thought you would like that.
There's an interesting crossover with Punky Brewster.
Oh.
Well, no, we watched it, that bizarre...
Did we? Oh.
Saturday morning preview thing.
That's right.
When we get to that point of when that happened, we may do it as a recap.
So weird.
Yes.
And then the director, Bob Claver, was a producer on The Partridge Family for a long time and also directed some episodes of Mork and Mindy and Welcome Back, Kotter. This episode aired on Wednesday, November 19th in 1980. It was on the 9:30 time slot, and it was up against Soap and the CBS Wednesday night movies. So who knows what was playing that night?
Those like Wednesday night or weeknight movies could either be like a television airing of a feature film, or it could be a made-for-television movie, of which there are a few starring some of our ladies from this program.
This season was when the show actually started to be successful, because it ended up being rated 26th for the season. Mm-hmm. The top 10 shows of the season were 60 Minutes, Alice, The Jeffersons, MASH, House Calls, Little House on the Prairie, Three's Company, Dukes of Hazzard, The Love Boat, and actually the number 1 show was Dallas. The rest of them were not in any kind of order, but the number 1 show was Dallas.
Okay.
The top song at this time in the US was Lady by Kenny Rogers. I don't know that one. Movies that were released: Heaven's Gate premiered, Ordinary People came out in wide release in many theaters, and Private Benjamin was the top grossing film.
Have I had you watch that yet?
No.
Private Benjamin is a Goldie Hawn movie. First of all, there is, I think it was probably a backdoor pilot later on in the series with Natalie, where she goes to that military...
Oh, yeah.
Like a military academy for girls or something.
Right.
And has to jump out of a plane. Spoilers for what's coming up. But I think that was inspired by Private Benjamin. But there was a television series. I was looking to see who starred in it, because it wasn't... Lorna Patterson played her in the movie, or in the show. But Eileen Brennan was in both the film and the TV show. And it was one of those shows that was on, and I think my mom liked liked it. Private Benjamin is a movie about a woman who, I think she's like a rich woman, and for some reason she joins the military. I think she's like a socialite. It'd be like if Blair joined the
You're really selling me this movie.
joined the military. The movie I rewatched not super recently, but in my adult life, and I was like, this movie is really adult, like in certain ways. Written by Nancy Myers.
Oh, interesting.
A sheltered young high society woman joins the army on a whim and finds herself in a trickier situation than she ever expected. And then Eileen Brennan plays the drill sergeant, and they're just constantly in conflict. And so the TV series was like that in an episodic manner. So it always got into like silly hijinks and different stuff. But the film is a great film. As far as I remember, I would like to revisit it. But I mean with you, but not for the podcast is what I'm saying. So if you're listening,
Sure.
you should just check it
Go
out.
enjoy it.
The reason I initially asked you to pull these details is one, they're fun, but two, it kind of gives some context to one, what was happening at the time, but two, I like to think of, well, okay, these characters in this show are existing in this time, and they sometimes reference going to movies or seeing certain things, and they will reference certain pieces of pop culture.
Right.
These girls are 15, 16. Maybe they went and saw Private Benjamin and like,
Yeah, I could see it.
and also to think about someone like Goldie Hawn, who is so known for her comedic work. And I think certainly I would imagine is just a strong influence or a present influence on, these young female performers who are on a sitcom.
Yeah.
Lisa Whelchel specifically does a lot of physical comedy. She seems to be the one who's the least afraid of getting silly.
Yeah.
And so there are certain beats where the same way, I'm going to loop this to a very modern thing, but Ariana Grande has cited being very influenced by Goldie Hawn. And if you look at her body of work where she's done comedic work, I think you can really see that she
Yeah.
has a lot of these classic influences. It seems weird to say classic influences on things that I grew up on, but she's inspired generations of
Yeah.
performers, and I think that's pretty fun.
Well, now you're describing this movie, and now I'm thinking of that Disney movie with
Cadet Kelly.
Yeah, I was like, why can't I think of the
Okay,
name?
no, truly, for listeners, if you are not in your 40s and you're half that age, Cadet Kelly is essentially
Like a comedic version of that.
it's spawned from the idea of Private Benjamin. It's a Disney version of Private Benjamin.
That makes sense.
Only Cadet Kelly is far more queer.
Yeah,
I think.
there's a lot happening in that movie. Go watch it. If you are into the facts of life, you'll probably like
If
it.
you enjoy the facts of life, you will probably enjoy Cadet Kelly.
Oh, truly. For my Today in History, there was a Calvin Klein jeans ad that starred Brooke Shields. And on this day in history, that ad was banned by CBS. It was also at some point banned by ABC. But it's the one where she's like 15 years old. She's sitting there in her jeans. She's like whistling. And then she's all like, you know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing. Yeah. And that ad was banned Day in History because it was too scandalous.
Honestly, I have not watched the Brooke Shields documentary, so there's a lot that gets uncovered in that. So
I'm sure.
there may be a very clear explanation of other stuff. But yes, well, Calvin Klein notoriously known for pushing boundaries in ways that some people
Yeah,
were
he
like,
was unapologetic.
what's going on here?
He was unapologetic for this ad.
To be, I was going to say to be fair, to be realistic about the era, I think that well, I think this comes up, I think in the show too, that like there are certain things that I think right now, 2024, you hear 15-year-old talking about essentially
Yeah.
like
Going commando.
going commando in Calvin Klein jeans. In 1980, it was banned because it was perceived
Yeah.
as scandalous. But I also think that culturally, we weren't viewing 15-year-old girls as girls.
Well,
They were-
especially not ones that had careers.
Right. And that
And
doesn't mean that they're not
they are-
underage. It doesn't mean
yeah.
that they're not girls. It's just that the way that society looked at them. And actually, this episode that we're about to talk
Yeah.
about kind of gets into that space. So that's an
I
interesting
agree.
fact, I think, to bring up.
Yeah, and to be fair, the way that she is stylized in the ad either, like she's not stylized like a child. They are clearly trying to make her look like an adult, but she's not. Those are the facts.
Of the 1980s. I also think that I want to say probably up until the millennial generation, that being in your teens as a young woman was so much about just trying to jumpstart that line over into adulthood. And I'm not saying that millennials didn't experience that as well, but I do think that the millennial generation is when we started to see a shift of just being like, I kind of want to hold on to my youth a little bit longer because I feel like I'm being forced into an adult space when I'm not prepared for it. You're
Yeah.
the millennial in the conversation, so you let me know if that sounds
that's
accurate.
Yeah, and I mean, also millennials in general have a problem with not being able to access a lot of what makes people consider us adults to begin with. So it's not just a reluctance; it's an impossibility in some cases.
Fair.
Yeah, you do have a point. So we can start getting into our episode, and we'll start with our 3 different plot synopses
All right.
from 3 different sources. The first one comes from IMDb, keeps it real simple. A new student, Jo Polniaczek, arrives at Eastland.
Okay.
That's it.
Yes.
That's all they have to say.
That does happen.
Tubi describes the episode thusly. Mrs. Garrett is in for a real headache at the start of Eastland's new semester when she decides to make roommates of streetwise new student Jo Polniaczek and the snobbish Blair. Also, I want to note that Tubi misspelled Polniaczek.
Ugh.
How dare they?
I have known how to spell Polniaczek since I don't know when I learned to spell it, but I did
Oh,
at
I'm
some
sure.
point, and I have never forgotten.
It's important. And the booklet that comes with the DVD set,
The Bible.
the Bible, describes it in this way. In addition to her new responsibilities as school nutritionist, Mrs. Garrett has her hands full when she decides to make roommates of streetwise new student Jo and snobbish Blair. So there's some overlap there between the Tubi and the booklet.
The streetwise and the snobbish.
Yeah, that is
My
interesting.
soap opera. When I watch this show, I'm watching
The streetwise and the
Streetwise and the
snobbish.
snobbish.
Yeah, so that's what I have for that. We can go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, the recap. We are moving into season 2, meaning that there is this new version of the theme song.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, probably the version that, if you remember the show, this and the third version are very similar. It's just that version 3 is very late 80s, like the latter half of the 80s. So it's like got some electric guitar in it.
Yeah,
And
it goes a little harder.
Yeah, it gets a little amped up.
But this actually, I think, covers more seasons total. So
Yes, it does.
In that sense, it's also probably the one most people know.
Yes. And also, we failed to mention this in the Patreon episode or at all in anything we've done so far, but it is a commonly known fact that Alan Thicke,
Oh, yeah.
previously, there was a point in time when I was young, when you said Alan Thicke, people knew, oh, that's the dad from the show Growing Pains. But now we have to say Alan Thicke, the father of Robin Thicke.
Right.
And I think even that might be phasing out as a little bit of old news. He was just a famous sitcom dad who also happened to write this theme song. And I once went to a taping of Growing Pains, and someone asked that question, which I'm sure was probably asked at every taping, and he sang a little bit of it. And I'm thinking, how many times did that man have to sing this song to a show that was not a show that he was on?
Well, and it's just like all the like girls get asked to sing it too. It's just like the thing that everyone latched onto this theme song. People just fucking love it.
When I've watched any interview like from the last 20 years, and then it'll be, the thing is it's so sweet, but also I'm like, oh God, it's happening again.
Yeah.
Because it'll be like some like morning talk show host, like
He's
this
very excited.
a woman who grew up on the show, and she's like, you take the good, and I'm like, don't do it. And then
But they do it every time.
they have to, the actors have to sit there and be like, yeah, that is in fact the song.
Yeah.
I've
it's
heard
true.
it 8 million times. They'll play it at my funeral.
They might.
They might. But they might play it at my funeral.
That's true.
I'm just saying it can be in the mix. But use the third version. That's my favorite.
I know.
I like to, when I'm watching a show, most of the time, I like to listen to a theme all the way through to get pumped for each episode. I don't care if I'm binging a show. I don't care if I'm
do
watching
not
Law and
skip
Order
the
SVU.
intro.
If you're skipping the intro to Law and Order SVU, why are you even watching it?
What are you doing?
What are you doing? You got to get primed and pumped for that.
And there's nothing else
Whatever's-
like it.
No.
Nothing else like that theme song.
Anyway, but the facts of life, same thing. I
It's
think
so
it
good.
brings you in.
It welcomes you.
All right. Anyway, so we're on a new set. This is the show is now retooled. Previously, the first season took place at the girls' dormitory at Eastland School for Girls, and now
cafeteria.
yeah, this is kind of it's like a dining room cafeteria area. There will be a kitchen. There's also like a little lounge
Yeah.
with like some vending machines and a sofa. So that's the new space. We are now, the show's been refined down to our 4 primary girls. We'll open with seeing Natalie.
Well, and you know, the intro lets us know that the cast has been halved as well.
Yes,
And there's a new actress as well.
Nancy McKeon,
Nancy McKeon's here, you guys.
who apparently was discovered from a Hallmark commercial. I mean, she was acting a long time before this. Before this show, they were looking to bring in a new performer. So one of the producers, when they were looking to rework the program, someone said, you have to see this Hallmark commercial. And it was a Hallmark commercial with Nancy McKeon, and she's giving her dad her dad gives her a card.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll see if I can find the link to it. But it's, it's a 1970s dad giving his teenage daughter a card, and it's kind of like everything he could never say to her because dads don't know how to communicate
Of course.
with words, but they can sure go to Hallmark and buy a card. Anyway, she like cries in the like there's like a single
Yeah.
tear kind of a thing, and they're like, "Who is this? She's amazing," and they're right. She is.
They are right. Yeah.
Find
yeah.
me someone who can cry as on cue and perfectly as Nancy McKeon as Jo Polniaczek. I don't
Oh
know.
my God. Yeah. But yeah, she'd had like guest roles in a bunch of things at this point, like Starsky and Hutch and The Love Boat, but this was her big break.
And so we open on Natalie, and we see this new set.
Natalie's there. She's looking at her options. There's a bunch of fruit and there's donuts, and Natalie picks the donut because she knows what's good.
I do think it is played because Natalie is also kind of framed not by the show but by his viewers as like, oh, she's the chubby one, or she's like,
Right.
The show doesn't generally lean into that. Although there were a couple of jokes in this episode that
Yeah, it's unusual for
I can't
the
tell,
treatment of Natalie.
But they like walk a line of like, are you making fun of fashion? Are you making fun of? In this case, I was like, is this a joke about the options being offered to kids when you give kids apples, bananas, and oranges and donuts?
Right.
Because there's a later point where Joe goes for the donuts and not the fruit as well. So
Yeah.
I was kind of like, I was looking at that because Mindy Cohn has said that she didn't feel like the show really made fat jokes or anything.
Not at her expense anyway.
Yeah, not at her expense.
And, her character is supposed to be fat and happy, essentially. She has some lines in the first season that give her that characterization.
We dip into some, I think it's season 1 has some episodes about dieting. But yeah, they're never centered around Natalie. It's more about other girls struggling with how they want to be perceived. So yeah, we opened right with that. And I was like, oh, is this like, I can't tell which way this is going. But also like, if it were me, I would go for the donut.
I mean, who wouldn't?
So Natalie is there and Tootie enters. Tootie is wearing no roller skates.
No
Her
roller
skates are gone.
They're gone.
But she is wearing like a Western outfit.
It's
she
really
has on
interesting.
a fringe vest. Her jeans have little fringe on them.
Yeah.
She's wearing Western boots, and she is carrying, I want to say, a vinyl purse.
Yeah.
And listen, if you don't know your G.I. Joe PSAs, maybe I'll link to that as well. It's just funny though, because it's like that like little strappy purse that I feel like in that era, if you're a young lady, you need to have a purse.
Yeah, and like
for
a
your-
little Western shirt.
But it's
and,
like vinyl, so it doesn't quite go with the fringy leather.
Yeah.
The color does match though. Like it's like a tan.
Yeah,
to
it's a
match her
cute
tan
look
thing.
for her.
So she's coming in, and I mentioned this when we were watching this. I have never really clocked the background actors on this show, probably because most of the time there aren't any,
Right.
especially in the later seasons where we're in the house so much that there aren't
Yeah.
background. But in the school and in the cafeteria, there are performers just kind of filling in the space. And I was like, I've never looked at these like people before. And they're the two that it was kind of, that were central behind the action. One of them reminded me of Carrie White from Carrie.
Interesting.
And so I was like, oh, it's like Carrie White and a friend. Alt universe Carrie White having
Or
a
she
good
actually
time.
has a friend.
Yeah, she has a friend.
Oh, good.
It's
Then
probably
Eastland will be safe.
It's a Carrie White, Sue Snell, like,
Oh, the romance we all deserve.
yeah, truly. Anyway, I noticed that, but I was like, oh, there's people back there. So Tootie's back. She and Natalie are greeting each other, and Natalie asks how summer camp was. And Tootie opens her vinyl purse to take out a pair of shorts that Natalie clocks as like, those are boys' swim trunks.
And to be clear, that has to be the only thing that is in
Oh,
this
yeah.
purse.
Like, that's the
There's
size
no room
the
for
size of
anything
the purse
else.
is the size of a folded pair of swim trunks.
So she just has this purse to hold her boys' swim trunks.
Yeah, so she has these boys' trunks in her purse, and she claims that she was on a panty raid.
I am obsessed with this line. It is so funny. It is so absurd. The way she says it.
And Natalie, she's like, who did they come from? Like, how did you get them? And she's like, well, they weren't on anyone when I got them. And Natalie makes a comment about, I think you're missing the point.
Right.
A panty raid doesn't mean, well, first of all,
There's a lot happening here.
a
Hold
lot is
on.
happening. But a panty raid is like when you go into a dorm and like
Steal some panties.
raid the drawers, right? I mean, I don't know. I've never
panty
attended
raided.
any, but that's what I understand from culture and television. I don't think that you're supposed to like
Tear them off of somebody.
assault a person and remove
Yeah.
their shorts. I don't.
That's what Natalie thinks you should do. So take that for what it is.
They had no internet. It was 1980.
And Natalie is horny. We will see that this is a character trait of hers.
There is a truth truth to this show, which is that young women can be horny little maniacs.
Yeah.
And Natalie and Tootie are two of the horniest.
Yeah.
I think that's a refreshing, they never use that terminology in
No.
the program, but it is refreshing to see young women who are like sexually curious and aren't ashamed of that they're
Yeah.
constantly like, and I don't mean that they don't, it's not like gross or anything. They're not saying like
Right.
obscene things. It's just that like they clearly have an interest in sex, or at least like what are the steps leading up to that. They have a natural interest in what it means to be developing and mature and pursuing, in their cases, the opposite gender.
Yeah.
And I said that as if as if there are any like canonically queer characters presented here, but
To be clear, there aren't. But some of these characters that are not canonically queer are not quite as horny as others.
yes, this is true. Then Blair enters. Speaking of people who are perhaps not as horny as others, Blair comes in and she's got on her blazer and her boots and her like long pleated skirt. And she looked like in The Sims when you're like making a business sim.
Yeah, it's just like the standard outfit.
Like just like a general, like it's like randomized. And she's like, ooh, no, no.
And I
she's
thought her
ready to
blazer
go.
was like a solid color when she came in, but
Same.
it is not. It's like this whole like tartan plaid,
Yeah, because in my memory, and even as I was watching it, I clocked it as like maybe a burgundy.
navy blue. Wow, we were not on the
This
same
is
page
like
with
is
that.
the dress. I feel like it was like a color, but I don't
Yeah.
know what color I really thought it was.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's like a plaid design, but it's like a soft plaid. It doesn't have
Yeah.
like hard lines to it. I don't know how to describe it.
It's interesting.
If you've seen it, you can understand as well.
But she comes in, she's very happy to see Tootie and Natalie, which is like, it's not really a big change from last season, but it's a little more than you might expect because she wasn't super close with either of them last season, really.
You know why?
Because the girls she was closer to were written off the show.
Well, also there were 10 girls.
Yeah.
There were just too many characters. So
Yeah.
how do you get close to anything? But yes, so I think this is also a thing in addition to my thesis about is Warner Blair is Warner, Blair actually an incredibly queer character? But something that Blair gets kind of written off as in general by most people, including Lisa Whelchel, is
Yeah.
a spoiled, superficial person. 100% she is spoiled.
She certainly has her
is
moments.
Very wealthy and privileged. But I do think that the memory of her or the first glance of her seems like those things. But I'm like, from watching the show and going through it as we're about to, I don't think she's as flighty and superficial as people think. I think that's something she can put out there, and she does this, I think, with intent later on for certain reasons.
Yeah.
But I think she is someone who wants to have closeness with people, and she just hasn't really had an opportunity until we get to this point in her life where she can actually connect and grow.
Yeah, and I was thinking we'd probably go into this more when we cover the first season, but I think that the way her character was conceived is she's not a character we're supposed to like. But I think that just the way that Lisa Whelchel plays her, which I think to some extent the way that Lisa Whelchel claims to see Blair is almost downplaying her own talent. Because she brings something to this character that gives Blair a lot of heart, and that has to come from somewhere. And I think that Blair was supposed to be there to push people's buttons, but she became much more of a loved character because of just how much was put into her.
I also think that the introduction of Jo, which we are about to get, also feeds that, because I think
100%.
I think Lisa Whelchel as a performer having Nancy McKeon to play off of,
Right.
as an equal, and not that Tootie and Natalie aren't Blair's equals as far as financially they are not, but as far as students at the school, they are, and Mindy Cohn and Kim Fields are tremendous performers, and I think as actors they're all great.
Yes, I agree.
But I think that giving these two characters and these two performers someone of their same age to play off of in a way that they get to have these moments also helps round Blair out. In the same way that I think Tootie and Natalie as a duo have already started to do that.
Yeah, they have that from the first season.
This will continue to shape in that direction. So let's
Yeah.
keep pushing them that way.
Let's go that way.
Tootie comments that Blair has only brought one suitcase, but Blair's like, oh no, that's just my makeup case. The rest is on a truck. And this is a joke that will run for the remainder of the series, that Blair does not travel light. She travels with everything.
So many clothes.
And whatever, shoes,
Yeah.
hair dryers, whatever, who knows?
Everything.
Coffee maker if she needs it. I don't know what she's packing in there. Natalie at this point announces that Mrs. Garrett, who formerly was their house mother at the dormitories, has been promoted to school dietitian.
Yeah. Or nutritionist, whichever word is used.
She
They get
says
used.
dietitian.
I thought she said nutritionist because
But
that's
then
what I wrote
later
down.
nutritionist is said. Well,
Who knows? Either way,
I thought she said dietitian, but then also nutritionist is used.
we think the opposite things. Who knows?
Anyway, she's there about nutrition.
Yes.
Then we have the return of Arnold.
It's his final appearance on The Facts of Life.
And again, the Patreon. No, I should have said this at the top. The Patreon episode for season 1, episode 1 is available for free. If you go to the Patreon, it's there. It's a freebie just to get everybody started. First one's free. Get a sample, get a taste, see if you like it. So you can decide if you want to subscribe for more of those. If you would like to hear more about Arnold, you can go to that episode. So Arnold, played by Gary Coleman, he's a character from Different Strokes. He's there. He's carrying a lobster because the cook is going to cook him.
But the cook is cooking like one lobster to feed an entire school of girls. I don't understand this part.
No, because it's the first day of school, or the first day of everyone returning to school. Maybe he was just cooking for himself.
Maybe. I was just like, come on, there's no way they serve lobster at this private school.
Maybe it was for like a dietary requirement.
Maybe so.
Maybe Blair requested lobster.
Oh, I mean, I could see it actually.
So he's got this lobster. He's rescuing him. He's named him Claude. Mrs. Garrett appears, and she already looks younger because her hair is different. Also, she does seem to have lost weight as per her own desire.
Which I read that, obviously Charlotte Rae actually did lose weight, but I read that she did it with the help of a nutritionist of her own, which helped inspire the story for Mrs. Garrett's change of career.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
There are a lot of comments about how thin she looks. She is wearing a fabulous, like, purple suit.
Mm-hmm. She does look really good.
She looks really good. But it's so interesting because it's like, in all this talk about dieting, the audience is like going crazy. They're like, yeah, woo! And that's just an era of culture.
There's a lot of body stuff going on.
Yeah. So, and she does make the comment, she's on the new inflation diet. You eat what you can afford. Tootie's actually paying some attention to Arnold. He seems to be into it, which, again, referencing his previous or our last episode talking about him, he was not into girls. He didn't like them trying to find him or kiss him or hug him. And now he's kind of like, hey, Tootie. Like, he's trying to.
He's into Tootie, which, I mean, fair.
So he offers to give her a tour of the new building or new space, or how it's not a new building, but maybe new to Tootie.
Yeah.
He takes her off.
She's a bit reluctant, but she goes
She's
with it.
also, again, I meant to look up what Arnold's age is supposed to be in the show.
Yeah, because Tootie's already a small person and he's much smaller than she is.
Well, I think it is kind of a funny, I think it's like an extreme version of like girls just growing faster than boys.
Right.
Because she just is like, she's got a lot of height on him.
Yeah.
They leave. We hear the sound of a motorcycle outside.
A loud one.
Again, the background actors react, and I was like, oh my God, they're back. They're reacting to this.
Natalie looks thrilled, to be honest. Yeah, she's like, this could be something.
And then we have the entrance of Jo Polniaczek. She is wearing a denim jacket, jeans, a dirt bike motorcycle helmet. She comes in and asks if she's in the right place, and Blair directs her to say that the delivery boys enter over there. Mm-hmm. And Joe's like, delivery boy,
give me a break.
She takes off her helmet to reveal she's got like a ponytail or maybe a braid, but she is a girl.
She is a girl.
Blair is like shocked.
Yeah.
And she's like, I can't believe this. And Natalie says, you can't believe it. I was about to ask him to the fall dance. Natalie was just like, a delivery boy's coming in?
All right.
All right. Well, it turns out it's your new friend, Jo.
And it turns out Jo is sensitive because just the idea that Natalie mistook her for a boy makes her like threaten to hit her. So we can see right away, Jo is sensitive.
Jo Polniaczek, I think the first probably 2 seasons she's on this show, but particularly her first season here, Jo has the biggest chip on her shoulder
She
about
is a little punk.
Anything, and about money, about her name, about how she looks, about her family, about God, about anything that she thinks is important. She will smack you. She will punch you. She doesn't usually actually follow through.
No.
Unless severely prompted. That'll come later.
We'll get to that.
But she's really sensitive to this stuff.
Yeah.
So, Mrs. Garrett introduces herself by her new job title. I didn't write what it was, so it could be nutritionist.
It gets used pretty interchangeably, so I wouldn't worry too much about it.
But she seems to be the one who knows who the new students are. And I was like, why does the school nutritionist know like what students are coming
I had the same question. She's not an administrator.
You know what, though? But she's a woman.
Oh, so it's her job to know
It's
things.
still, listen, it might be 1980, but women are still expected to know things like children's names.
Yeah, this is true. Well, so she says, oh, you must be Jo. And Jo is kind of an asshole because she's completely unapologetic about the fact that she just parked her motorbike on Mrs. Garrett's garden and crushed all her flowers.
She says she thought they were weeds.
Yeah.
Blair, now, again,
Listen.
we are in the space of narrative intent versus how something reads. Blair, in the context of the show, is 100% eyeing Jo to like look at her clothes. She's a rich, snobby girl, and she's taking in this is outdated fashion.
Particularly the flared jeans.
This is not what someone wears to private school. Never mind that Tootie showed up like fringe central. She's
Tootie
got
can
leather
pull it
fringe.
off.
She's got denim fringe. She's got a vinyl purse. She's got her cowboy boots. But if
denim-clad Jo.
If
is
you've
another
seen
story.
a fan vid of these two, this clip is in it because it looks like Blair is checking her out.
I do have to say, I did wonder, is Jo's entire wardrobe in this single backpack that she brought with her?
Probably.
It seems right.
Well, because it's uniforms at school.
That's true.
I could imagine she could ride her bike up and maybe her mom could pack a box of her clothes and ship them over.
That's true.
You know, not everyone has the luxury of probably loading up into a limousine and riding up to school like Blair does. I could...
Or having a truck send her wardrobe.
That's right, she does do it. Does Tootie bring a suitcase in with her?
I think she's carrying a bag, yeah. I don't remember how large it is because it kind of, as soon as she sees Natalie, it drops by her feet and we don't really see it.
But that wouldn't be your whole semester's worth of clothes either.
Probably not.
You know, she probably just threw her basics in a backpack and rode on up.
Yeah.
I didn't see what was on the bike, so Natalie tries to break the ice. And Blair's like, okay, yes. And she goes to introduce herself as Blair Warner. And she does the patented Blair Warner handshake. It's
She
a firm
does.
offering to a handshake. Jo meets it, but she's got mud or grease or something on her hands.
She has it on her face too, whatever it is.
That like this whole time she's been just cupping it in her hand, waiting for the opportunity to like wipe it in the hand of a rich girl. I don't know.
It seems like something she might do, actually.
And then she tells Blair to steam clean it. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Garrett is like, hey, well, I've posted the dorm announcements. Again, as a school nutritionist.
She has a lot of duties.
She posted the dorm announcements, the dorm assignments. She's posted them. And so they go to look and Blair comments on the name of her new roomie, Jo Polniaczek. Now there will be a discrepancy between whether it's Joanne or Joanna. I am going to believe that this is something that happens to Jo frequently.
Yeah.
I am in the camp that her name is Joanna because that's what her father calls her. Mm-hmm. My first name is spelled with a Y. It's Karen.
With a Y.
I try not to use that in public anymore. But it has a Y in it, so sometimes people read it as Catherine.
Weird.
More letters than what my name is. But I could buy, to just forgive the probably what is just poor continuity here.
Yeah.
That Jo is somebody who people don't bother reading her whole name.
Because they get so tripped up on her last name.
They see the Polniaczek and they're like, Jo Polniaczek.
Yeah, they just short circuit.
Polniaczek is the later one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so Blair mispronounces the name, kind of makes fun of it. Jo again threatens, another threatening fist.
Because it turns out they're gonna be roommates.
Well, Blair returns with some insults first, and then yes. And Mrs. Garrett suggests that Natalie help Jo find another place to park her bike. And Jo says, why don't I just park it on Blair's face? And it's such a great delivery. And she storms out of the room. Blair is completely offended by this.
I do think it's interesting, though, that she has bothered to learn Blair's name. Because she's clearly not here to make friends. And she's on
a reality show. She's not here to make friends. She's on Survivor.
This is literally what I wrote in my notes. Jo is not here to make friends. But she did bother to learn Blair's name.
So Blair is lamenting the room assignment after Natalie and Jo leave. Mrs. Garrett's like, well, actually, I'm the one who put you together. Mm-hmm. Blair can't understand why she thought Mrs. Garrett was her friend and nutritionist. And
also, in this whole time, Blair has not washed her hand. She's just here with her dirty hand from that handshake, just still going about her day.
It was 1980. We didn't wash our hands as much. It was pre-COVID. Nobody knew to wash their hands.
Anyway, I just thought it was funny.
It's
weird for her.
To not even have like wiped it.
Because she has like a moment when she sits down on the couch and she like looks at her hand to like make clear that it's still dirty. And it's just like, what are you doing?
Bizarre.
Find a tissue or something.
Well, instead, she has to listen to Mrs. Garrett tell her. Basically, Mrs. Garrett like is just giving her a bunch of Jo's personal history.
Yeah. Well, she says, oh, well, you're special and Jo is special too.
Right. She says she was doing great in school until her dad left home a couple years ago. Her mom started having to work double shifts. Jo got into trouble with a boy, and Blair's like, oh,
ooh.
she's like, not that kind of trouble, which at that time meant you got pregnant.
Yeah.
Issues like truancy, cutting class, getting into
That kind of trouble.
yeah, like legal
Yeah.
trouble. And so she kind of talks Blair up and inflates her ego and says that she's perfect. And Blair's like, fine, yes, okay, I'll help the people.
She knows how to play Blair, but also part of what she tells Blair is that Jo performed better on the Eastland entrance exam than
Yes.
Blair did.
Blair got a 96.
Jo got a 98, and Blair is genuinely impressed by that.
Yes, she does. She like seems to respect.
Yeah.
I also think this is important, just an important detail, that Blair is smart.
Yes.
Blair is a person who can do well in school, and so is Jo.
Yeah.
And this will carry on through the run of the series. I think it's also misremembered or perceived that Blair is like an airhead.
Right.
And that she's not a book smart, like scholastic academic type person, but she is. Like
She is, yeah.
She later chooses some paths that you have to really buckle down and study for.
Yeah.
And Jo, similarly, like her scholastic and academic path is she's on it. She is
Yeah.
like this is an interesting thing because this is a show about 4 girls at school. And I think when I look back on other shows, so many teen shows are centered around school, right? How often do we talk about your academic performance or your
Right.
how often do you have characters who are smart and successful academically that aren't nerds, aren't
Right.
portrayed as like nerdy types that are like having to sacrifice a social life for their
Because if there's one thing Blair Warner does not do, it is sacrifice a social life.
yeah. She's smart enough that she balances all of that and is constantly out doing stuff. I think that's what makes Jo and Blair also such an interesting dichotomy within the narrative, which is that Jo's they're both, I think, by some made up metric of intelligence, whatever it is. I feel like they're both kind of in the same space, right?
Right.
But Blair's that annoying person who can kind of breeze through it.
Right.
And then when she has to buckle down and take care of stuff, she can. And Jo's the person who is constantly working at it, like constantly just trying to make sure she's on top of everything and doing the studying and doing the reading and taking all the classes and juggling that in a different way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm kind of talking that out right now that that's something that we are presented. And then similarly, Natalie is so driven to ultimately become a writer and she makes different choices about things. Tootie wants to be an actor, but they're all presented as they're good students who study, who do the work, who are disappointed if they don't perform well. I think that's an interesting and unique thing about this show that is, it just kind of hit me that we spend a lot of time, even in just what's the periphery here, confirming that it's okay to be good at what you do, to be smart, to be social, to be creative. And none of those things set you apart from everyone else, with the exception of sometimes Blair's like socialite, like high society
Right.
shit. But that's because she's like rich and she sometimes uses that to separate herself from people. But I think that's interesting. I'm sorry, that was a tangent about.
No, that's fine. But also, to go back to where we are in the narrative, I understand that it's exposition as much for the audience as for Blair, but like, why is Mrs. G spilling all of Jo's fucking personal bullshit?
Like essentially doxing her.
Yeah, it's a little not cool.
She's gossiping about it. She's
She
like,
is.
this is like when you go to church and you have the prayer request circle time,
Oh,
which is
geez.
really just everyone being like, listen, my best friend Stephanie is going through this thing where she's really struggling with being pure with her boyfriend Brad. And it's just like, we don't need to talk about that. Like
Everyone's titillated.
yeah, it's like it's weirdly like it's kind of that thing of like, let me tell you about this person so we can help them.
But it's like, I mean,
Like
first
that was
of all,
all Joe's information to share.
Yeah, and first of all, how does Mrs. Garrett even know? And second of all, obviously she trusts Blair to be an adult about this. To be fair, Blair basically is an adult about all this information. It does not get spread around. Still, it's not cool.
It is that line of like, this is a completely inappropriate thing to do, but also I think of everyone in this room who's going to be discreet about it.
Yeah.
Blair understands what it means to be discreet.
Yeah.
But yes, I thought that too. I was like, Mrs. Garrett, what are you doing?
Oh my God.
Also, you're the school nutritionist. Like,
why do you have all this personal
what's
information
happening?
Oh, it's crazy.
All the time travel that she does. She's time traveling. Okay. Speaking of time traveling, we're going to time travel a couple minutes forward to Mrs. Garrett's room. We have Jo offering to fix the broken flowers with electrical tape that she has on a little like rope tied to her
It is
belt
like
loop.
the most glorious detail about her outfit is the fact that she just has tape hanging from her belt, just at the ready.
She's ready to go.
It's the gayest thing I've ever seen.
You don't even have, you're going to start doing
No.
this, I think.
But like I used to carry around duct tape in high school. Like
Well.
this is just, it's just being prepared
Truly.
in that sense. But I was noting that she's a lot sweeter now that she's alone with Mrs. Garrett.
Yeah.
Like before she was just like, I thought your flowers were weeds. And she's like, I'm so sorry about your flowers.
Well,
Like she's putting on a front.
I think even in that scene before in the cafeteria, I don't think she's being as, because Mrs. Garrett's like, because that comes out of the exchange of her saying, oh, how'd you know it was me? And she's like, well, no one has ever parked a motorcycle in my flower bed before. And she's like, oh, I thought they were weeds. I thought that was also kind of like, she's a kid from the city.
That's fair. She does talk about how she doesn't know anything about flowers.
Yeah. But you are right that there is definitely a tonal shift in her when she's just with Mrs. Garrett, that she's like more just like a kid talking to an adult. And then, she kind of says like, this is a nice room. I'd be better off in here than with Blairsy in Snobbo City. And she also says, she's like a Barbie doll. You wind her up and she says, I love you to herself. Which is not wrong.
No, she has Blair pegged like immediately.
Would 100% has done it and will continue to do exactly that.
Yeah, right off the bat, she's right.
As if she heard her own name, Blair Warner appears, and Mrs. Garrett's like, oh, you must have millions of things to talk about. And the audience laughs at this line in a way that I'm like,
yeah.
Something that did happen in the world of sitcoms is that there would be moments that were cut for time. This happens
Sure.
when you shoot anything. It's not exclusive to sitcoms. But with a live audience, if you are shooting in front of a live audience and not using a track, but anyway, if you're having genuine response from an audience, something that can happen is this could be the third time the audience has seen it. So maybe they know what's coming. It could be they're just encouraged to respond in certain ways. And it could also be, was there just a line or something that was cut?
Right. That makes this funnier.
It does feel weird because
Yeah.
she doesn't deliver it like a joke. And there's just like a definite like ripple of laughter that you hear. So
But Mrs. Garrett's really pushing these two to like
yeah,
connect.
she's like, you should just get to know each other. So
Yeah.
Blair's there to genuinely give it a shot. Jo still has that gigantic chip on her shoulder.
I mean, to be fair, Blair is kind of sneering through her attempt to like be genuine.
Okay, here's the thing. Here's what's funny is that you are such a Jo Polniaczek type.
What are you talking about?
Like, not now, but I mean, like, you've even talked about this. Like, when you were younger, you would perhaps react similarly on a lower scale.
I
to
was not
certain
nearly
things.
so bad.
No, but so it's interesting to me because I don't read the sneering as much as maybe you do because you're maybe looking at it through a different side.
Maybe.
Also, to be real, sometimes my autistic filter, like, I'm like, Blair's so nice. And you're like, she's being kind of a bitch.
I don't think I think she is genuinely making an effort. She's just is so like, she's like, oh, okay, we're really.
Well, that's not so much sneering, but that's like kind of gritting your teeth and getting through it. I
Yeah.
guess. But she's like, let's try this. Jo is like,
She's kind of not having it.
And then Blair makes some comment about Prince Charles being the perfect roommate, which
God, it's horrifying.
by Prince Charles, she means King Charles at this point. But this is back when he was younger. It's pre-Diana.
It's still horrifying.
She comments, she apologizes for the comments she made about Joe's clothes.
This is when I do think she really is making an effort.
And then she kind of looks at herself in the mirror.
Because that's what she does.
And they both make an agreement to go ahead and try to be roommates. But then it already loops back around where Blair offers to share clothes with her. Jo takes a shot at it, being like, oh, you don't mind if I take it in?
Yeah.
Suggesting that she thinks that Blair wears a bigger size than she does.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
a
a-
little bit of a dig at Lisa Welch's.
Well,
I mean,
they're the same size.
they're at least close to it.
So I think it's also like that's just what Jo has in her arsenal.
Sure. But yeah, this is one of the few times there is something like a fat joke on the show. It doesn't really happen that much.
What I'm trying to get at here is it just feels much more like it's what Jo knows will bother Blair.
Yeah.
She knows like, oh, this will get under her skin because she's so superficial and vain. And vanity is, yes, Blair Warner vain.
100%.
Through and through, beginning to end. So yeah, I think that dig comes mostly from the fact that Jo has cataloged and tracked her and said, oh, this
Fair.
will get her. Arnold shows up with Tootie. He's been giving her a tour. He is suggesting he wants to be alone in Mrs. Garrett's room with her.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot.
And she's like, no. And she kind of like ushers him out, but she does shake his hand. I have here, the audience loves loves child's flirtation because he like is weirdly flirtatious with her.
Yeah, he's like, I'm never going to wash this hand.
And then she's like, oh, and he's like, to be fair, I wasn't going to wash it anyway. That's the thing though. They play him between like little boy and like.
Right. And age appropriate.
Yeah. And
but it's like, no, yeah, it's a little weird.
so she excuses him from the room. Tootie meets Jo, and Jo apologizes for spoiling things between her and her boyfriend.
Jo is much nicer to Tootie right off the bat than she was to either Natalie or Blair.
Also, Tootie is like, no.
Yeah, she's like, please.
He is not my boyfriend. That is Arnold. No. So Jo wants to know, hey, what do you do for men around here?
Oh my God.
And Natalie enters right on that line, and she's like, I came in at the good part because
Yeah.
she's there. She's, like we said,
Natalie's just ready for men.
yes, she's like, she wants to hear about it. She wants to know everything. She's like, oh, Blair, tell Jo about Bates Academy, which is like the companion school to Eastland. It's the boys' school across the way. And Blair says, oh, yes. And she's telling her, and she's like, I'll fix you up.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe's like, oh, no.
Honey, I said men.
Talking about men. Now, these girls, at best, are 15,
Maybe 16.
maybe going on 16. So Joe's like, you're describing high school boys. I am talking about men. Blair says she's dating a senior who is 19. Well, it's 1980. And listen, you could be 19 and be a senior. But
Sure.
again, she's 15, maybe 16.
Yeah.
They're bickering about the men and who's better at getting men. And it's like a big heterosexuality showcase.
Oh my God.
And Tootie
yeah.
and Natalie, if they had popcorn,
Oh,
they
they found
would
their
be
new favorite show.
eating it. They're like, this
They love
Joe and
this.
Blair heterosexuality showcase is our new favorite program.
Yeah, they're having a great time.
It's better than 60 Minutes, and that's the #1 show of the year. Blair is kind of already trying to like backpedal out of this conversation because she's
Right.
like, well, it's a good thing that we run in different circles, or I would show you, like I
Mm-hmm.
would do this. And Tootie, who loves to interject,
She's a little shit stirrer.
she
I love
says,
it.
hey, Blair, you could show her at the Chug-a-Lug bar on the highway. She says that whole phrase, the Chug-a-Lug bar on the highway.
Have you ever heard of a more appealing location?
There are lots of college guys. Reminder, these are 16 at best year old girls. Blair is irritated. You can see it. She's like, Tootie? Oh, like,
She's like, God damn it, Tootie.
no, we can't get in anyway because we're underage and they'll ask for IDs.
And Jo Polniaczek
turns out
whips out her fake ID.
Jo Polniaczek is great at fake IDs. And weirdly, Jo kind of flips over into this kind of friendly nature of like, oh, no, I can do that.
I've got an extra. I can make one for
Yeah, I
you.
can make one for you. I just need a picture. So Blair opens her wallet and like has one of those plastic photograph things that we don't carry anymore because all our pictures are on our phone. But
Yeah.
but you'd put pictures of your family or your dog or yourself
Your friends.
in there. So Blair, they're all pictures of her, and she starts going through them and being like, oh, there's this one, and she's like rattling off like about a half dozen, and Joe's face is just like she's horrified.
She's like, what the hell?
She's like, just pick one. I don't care. And they agree. They're going to go down to the Chug-a-Lug bar on the highway.
And they shake on
And
it.
they have a firm handshake on it.
Yep.
And we still don't know if Blair has washed her hand.
I hope at this point
I
she
would
has.
So Mrs. Garrett comes in right at the tail end of that. Good, you've agreed to room together. And that's when Tootie says, oh, they're going to do all kinds of things together. And again, the narrative is suggesting Tootie knows they're going to go sneak out to this bar, but
Come on. Come on.
and then Mrs. Garrett says, well, soon they'll be double dating. And Natalie's like, you don't even know. And then they leave. All the girls leave. And Mrs. Garrett is just like, I am just so good at this. Like kids, like they're one way, but I guess she's the greatest nutritionist who ever worked at a school. So
Total sidebar.
yes.
On Mrs. Garrett's wall, there are a bunch of pictures
Yes.
of, like, I assume people she admires.
Prominent women in history, or prominent
Well,
people in history.
It's not even women. So the ones that I were able to identify, there's definitely Emily Dickinson, there's JFK, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the other two I'm not 100% on, but I think that they're Gandhi and Winston Churchill. They were a little harder to, like, make out.
It's just people.
Just people Mrs. Garrett admires, next to like a cross stitch that says love or something. She's an interesting woman.
She's got a lot of interests. All right, so we head back down to the dining room, and our four girls enter. Jo and Blair are discussing what time they're going to leave. They're going to leave right. Jo suggests they leave right after dinner. Blair agrees, and they're opposites right now. Like as far as their tone, their everything, except they are in sync.
They're walking at the exact same pace.
They both walk up to that snack bar of the fruit and donuts, and at the same time, Blair grabs an apple, Jo grabs the donuts, and in that moment, Tootie's like, great, we'll be sure to be ready. Blair's like, without even looking at her, because she's just like in this...
She's getting her apple.
Yeah. She's like, oh, do you want to explain what you mean by we?
Yeah.
And Tootie has this great line about how it's... She gives this like brief lesson in first person plural and how we means, she and Natalie will be going with them. And Blair's like, you can't go.
We can't make a fake ID for you that
you
anyone
won't
would believe.
pass for 18 because again, Natalie is 2 years younger or 1 year younger.
I think Natalie's 2 years younger and Tootie's 3 years younger.
That sounds right.
But although, I mean, obviously the actresses, Mindy Cohn is the same age as Nancy McKeon. Nancy McKeon's playing older. Mindy's playing a little younger. And then Tootie, I think, is even a year younger than she's supposed to be.
And Lisa Whelchell's the oldest one.
She's playing a little younger.
But my point here is that they're definitely younger. Jo and Blair are not going to pass for 18. Like they're
not even
if
really.
they were to, it would be like barely.
Yeah.
Also, this is back when the drinking age was 18 in New York.
Yes.
Blair's like, no, you're not going to go in. And they're like, well, of course we're not going to go in. We'll just watch through the window. And Natalie makes a comment about this is her first shot at voyeurism.
Girl, what?
And Blair is like, no, I don't think so. And Tootie says, well, just remember that if I'm here, my mouth is here. And who knows what I'll say.
Yeah.
And Jo kind of asks, she's like, do we need to worry about her? And Blair's like, we should bring them with us if we don't want Tootie to like rat us out.
Yeah, because this has been a consistent for Tootie's character since like day one.
Yes, she loves gossip. She loves to talk. She loves to share.
Tootie's a shit stirrer.
So it's like, fine. Jo's like, that's fine. I don't care. Then again, Blair stalls.
She's like, oh, we can't do this.
I just remember the Chug-a-Lug bar is 5 miles away and I'm not riding on the back of your motorcycle. And so like, I believe this whole time Blair was like, yeah. No, I'm not going to go to the Chug-a-Lug bar.
She's just trying to find her way out this whole time.
So Jo's like, no problem. I saw the van outside. And Blair says, well, the keys are never in it. And Jo's like, I don't need a key. We'll hotwire it. And Blair has a great follow-up. It's like the van already has a heater.
Yeah.
Then she realizes,
oh, you mean stealing it?
You want to steal it. So they steal the van.
At this point, like, Jo has revealed herself to be such a little punk. Like, there's fake IDs. There's stealing a van. Like, this is day one at her new private school. And she's just like, listen, I don't care.
She's threatened to like punch 3 people.
Yeah, she just is out of control.
She drove over the flower bed. She just is out of control. That's why they had to send her to private school. They go to the Chug-a-Lug bar. Blair is insisting, doing that thing where she's calling off camera to, oh, the van is fine where it is. So Jo's obviously parked it somewhere. Tootie and Natalie just take their spot at the window where they're going to watch. Like, if you were in this bar and looked at, you'd see 2 children.
Just 2 children
looking in the window.
Staring. It's like, come on.
Jo is like struggling because she's wearing heels. And Blair thinks that the heels are tacky with jeans.
But like, where did
if
she didn't borrow them from Blair, like, where did they come from?
And then again, they're both kind of stalling of like, well, you could go in first, or do you want to go? I'll go in first, or do you want to go in first?
This is what I call the game of heterosexual chicken.
Oh yes, that's what's happening here.
It's 100% what's happening.
So they finally go in. Oh no, Tootie is the one she's like, go in there and get some studs. Like Tootie's like, we want to watch you hit on grown men.
Yeah, she and Natalie are so excited about this, but this point, Jo and Blair are really not.
Yeah, no, there were 3 channels on TV at the time, and so this is what they did for fun. So they go in. There's a bouncer, and it's like beefy guy who is a good like foot taller than both of them.
Yeah,
and he demands to see their IDs. So Jo hands hers over, and
she's very chill about it.
Looks over it. He's like, okay, and then Blair does that like quick flat, like the fake, as if she had a fake like FBI badge.
Yeah,
and was just like, and he's like, I'm not a speed reader, but he takes a look at it, and then he's like, oh whoa, he's like, oh, it's such a good picture.
Yeah, he compliments her tan, and she's like, oh, thank you.
So they come and sit at the bar
because they see this man sitting there, and they're like checking him out, and like,
well, I have a grown-ass man sits at the bar. He could be their teacher or their father or a priest or a grocer or literally any man over 35.
Yeah, I was like, this is a 35-year-old man, and they're looking at each other like, yeah, he's not bad. I'm like, do you know what an attractive man looks like?
No, they don't. They cannot name a single attractive man.
I have no other explanation.
The other explanation is it's 1980. They are children of the 70s. It was a weird, even through the course of the show when they reference like men they think are attractive, even like Tootie and Natalie will talk about it a lot. Mm-hmm. And it's just like weird older guys.
I don't really know what they're...
I do feel there was something at the time about masculinity and what was attractive or what was being peddled as being attractive. I don't know. Probably because 35-year-old men were in charge of media. or
There you
older
go.
men. Anyway, it is bizarre. In like when you put them all next to each other, he looks like their dad taking them out.
Yeah, it's really weird.
So he's there.
They sit
and,
next to him.
Joe orders 2 brews, and Blair says, 1 brew, I'll have a beer. Then it cuts to the bartender who looks like, the bartender looks like a caricature of a person. Because it's like a man with like a really like generic 80s, 70s into 80s, like curly hair, not like big, these like squared, rounded-ish, kind of tinted glasses, and then like I don't know, like a Henley shirt, some kind of shirt with, but the point is that it's like so close. It's like they had to include an insert because it's really close on his face, and he doesn't really react.
He just stares.
He stares at them and walks away, and it's distressing.
But also, like, Blair reaches over to Jo to touch her hand when she's like, I'll have a beer. Like, as if, I don't know. It's just
As
an
if they're
odd-
out together?
Yeah, it's just like an odd little moment.
It is. They introduce themselves to the man, and Blair Warner again gives her patented Blair Warner handshake. We cut back to Mrs. Garrett's room where she's doing some exercises while reading a book about exercising. And then Arnold comes in and he's bummed out that he's not spending more time with Tootie. And he makes a comment about how, like, at this rate, they'll be 70 before they get it on.
Yeah.
And
which is
again, I'm like, how old is Arnold? And also, everyone here is too young for this.
why? Yeah, no. Why is this even on his mind? What's going on?
But he, in turn, in talking to Mrs. Garrett, he accidentally reveals that the girls have left and stolen the van. So she's like, watch TV, watch something happy. I have to go. She rushes off to go get the girls.
And they're back at the bar with this man. And, you know, even though the whole point of this trip is supposedly to like pick up a man, as soon as this man starts expressing any interest in them, they are both so uncomfortable. They just don't look like they want to be here.
Because he's 35 and they're 15.
It's such heterosexual chicken. It's so sad.
So he's trying to flirt with them or whatever. And he's trying to guess what college they go to. He turns to Jo and he says, "You're easy." And she's like offended. She's like, "What?"
Yeah.
She's like, she's ready to punch another person.
Yeah.
But he's like, no, he's like, describes her like out of date clothes and whatever. And he's like, obviously you go to Sarah Lawrence, which
It's hilarious.
historically, or at least culturally, or at least colloquially, is recognized as being a school that perhaps you would attend if you were, I don't know,
A lesbian?
or at least some kind of a queer woman. Doesn't mean that if you went to Sarah Lawrence that you're a queer woman. It just means that there's a reputation.
Was it still all girls at this point?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I
Again,
should have
I
looked
was
that
now
up.
2 years old at this time, and I was not attending any colleges or reading about them. It's just, it's funny. It's
It is
kind of
funny.
like the Billie Jean King thing from the other episode. That's like a reference that's like,
Yeah, it's like this reference is, I'm sure, a total coincidence, but the way that it fits this like subtextual lens that we view it through.
and again, because I would buy it if they were actually going for that same joke. If we were looking at Jo, how she normally carries herself, but she's all kind of like femmed up for this
Yeah, she let her hair
manhunt.
down. And
So he guesses Sarah Lawrence, and they're like, "Oh yeah, okay." And then with Blair, he's like, "Well, you're like fancy, whatever." He's like, "Obviously, you go to secretarial school or beauty college," and she's like, "You son of a bitch."
she's offended.
She says, "Have you ever heard of Warner Textile Mills?" And he's like, "Oh, you work there." Actually, he calls her a working girl.
Which is like a whole other reference that
She says, "I own the place," which Blair has this habit of talking about things that she owns that her father owns.
yeah.
I mean, I guess perhaps if it's all under the Warner name, technically, does she own it? I
she's
don't
the Warner line.
But yeah, so she's like, no. So she's kind of angry about this.
She's getting visibly agitated
Yes.
because Tootie and Natalie are like, whoa.
And they think it's because they're outside of the bar, even though this is television, this is 1980s sitcom television, and there's no glass in those windows. So obviously they can hear everything that's going on. Tootie's like, oh no, that man said something to really irritate Jo or Blair, probably Jo too.
Of course.
So she's like, I'm going in there. And Natalie's like, well, you can't just go in. And Tootie says, we'll tell them we're very small Avon ladies. Which, hey, Avon ladies are no longer culturally relevant either.
Oh,
but
yeah.
the Avon lady was a lady who would come to your house with a little catalog and sell you things. I remember my mom's Avon lady. I can't remember her name, but I remember her face. She would come by and my mom would order they usually sold like makeup and assorted things. But I feel like my mom bought a lot of chapsticks for me from there. I don't know.
I don't think I ever, I think I honestly learned about Avon ladies from crossword crossword puzzles
Oh,
because it's a
interesting.
great crossword word.
But it was like a job that you could do if, say, for instance, you were a stay-at-home mom and you wanted to make money while your kids were at school. It was
Kind
something,
of a set your own hours kind of a...
yeah, it was the kind of
yeah.
like Mary Kay, like any
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
door-to-door thing that was popular at that window of time, or Tupperware even. You would have clients or regular customers, and you would go to their home and you'd show them whatever the newest stuff was, and they would place an order with you, and you take that back and then order it and then bring it by. It was a very pre-internet type of way to do business. But yeah, it was commonly for women to make money on their own. Anyway, so she says, we'll say we're very small Avon ladies, and she goes in, and of course these two children enter the bar. This guy's like, who are these kids? And Blair's like, but this is going to happen a lot. I'm going to say the wrong name because
It's
there's
fine.
4 of them. But Blair is like, oh, they're my sisters. And then right then Mrs. Garrett enters, and she does her first, at least of the season, and the first for this group with the girls. And they're caught, and Blair's like, oh, we just came out to blow off some steam. It's the first day of school, where literally they had school hasn't started yet. It was
Yeah,
established.
it's just move-in day.
Yeah, it's just moving day. Real busy. So she's trying to just, we just went out to do something. And the man reveals himself to be Officer Schuler with the Peekskill Police Department. But I'm like, okay, so you're a police officer. And you let these girls order beer.
You
I'm
hit on them.
assuming that they were drinking the beer in front of you. You hit on them.
Yeah.
And now you're going to arrest them.
Peekskill must not have much going on if, like, they're sending their undercover officers to, like, sit in a bar and hope that some children walk in.
No, I don't think that he was there on the job. I think this bitch was he was there.
You think so?
And then he was just like, oh, these clowns just came in.
Okay, fair. Maybe he
Because
was
he's
just...
like getting a beer, and like he just came back from the bathroom or something when he was first there. I don't know. I don't
know.
like him.
No one should.
First of all, because he's like, I'm arresting them because of their fake IDs. He
did he
never
even
saw
know?
them.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Garrett tries to talk him down, but
I
he's
think that's why I thought he must be there on some kind of assignment, like if there was some kind of signal from the ID guy.
Maybe.
But like, that's such a stretch, you know?
no, I think this guy just was there and then he saw an opportunity to get a promotion.
There you go.
Mrs. Garrett's like, listen, is that necessary? And he's like, no, we're going to take him to the station. Then she proceeds to like kind of rattle off every crime they've committed. It's not, yes,
She's
it's
like, it's
wrong
not
to
such a big deal. They committed this crime.
They snuck out. And that's not a crime. They had fake IDs, sure. And then they ordered beer.
They sipped on a beer.
Sipped on a beer. And then, yes, they stole the school van. And he's like, they stole the school van. And then she's like, where is the van? Or like you hear a car crash. And then she's like, where is the van? And then Joe's like, oh, I just parked it on the street. And so then for this to be the thing, he says, that's not a street. That's a one-way alley. I'm arresting you. And it's like that, like the parking violation was the last thing, like that was the last straw. He grabs Joe and Blair. He's like, I'm taking these 2 in. Mrs. Garrett is like, this is entrapment. And Tootie says, yeah, creep. Like she tells him, because I think Mrs. Garrett says, back off. And she pours a beer on his head.
Like a whole pitcher.
Yes, a whole pitcher of beer, a whole round.
Tootie does not mess around.
And so then he's like, everybody's going to jail. And we end on a to be continued, and then a freeze frame, and then a really long like applause break. That's how we did it back then.
I want to point out that Natalie has done nothing wrong.
Natalie's just standing there.
She's just there.
Yeah, she didn't show a fake ID. She didn't drink a beer. She didn't pour a beer on anybody.
I guess she walked into a bar she's not supposed to be in, but like...
She technically tried to stop her friend from going in.
But she's being arrested because that makes sense.
That's what happened in this episode. There is a whole second half to this episode that will be our next episode. A lot of episodes happening back and forth. Us, them, everybody. So this episode, here we are again. We have the introduction of the Jo Polniaczek character. It also serves as another pilot because we're establishing this is the place, these are the people, these are the relationships, and we have a setup. So we are now moving into this era of the show, the Polniaczek era.
The Polniaczek era.
Best one of all. I mean, we kind of covered all of the moments that I really remember from this, from the panty raid to the to all of it.
I just know I lost my mind the first time I heard Tootie talk about that panty raid, and I was like, what is this show? What is even happening?
So that's getting to know our 4 main characters and kind of how they operate in crisis. Or we will see more of that on the next episode.
Yeah, which I do want to point out that occasionally 2-part episodes did get aired on the same night, but this was not one of them.
No, and in most cases, unless it was like a special, well, sometimes you might have off an hour long, it might be like a special hour-long episode of whatever, but those are always kind of chopped up for syndication into
Yeah,
two.
for sure.
Similar to how the two films that they made, I think they premiered as 2-hour movies, like TV movies, and then subsequently afterward aired as 4 episodes.
Yeah.
We'll determine how we're going to approach those when we get to them, as either episodic or as kind of bigger features. Any other specific thoughts about this one? We did kind of, I think, cover it in the moment.
I think it's an interesting introduction to Jo, because so far she's not that likable yet. She's
agree.
just kind of a hard ass. And like, you know, I think you could think that she's kind of cool and kind of interesting and it's fun to see her like butt heads with Blair, but like she's also just right now, she's just a little punk. She's just showing up and causing all sorts of chaos.
But I think even with just that one kind of level of her, already you have someone for Blair to really dig into. And to counter her, because I think that was part of what got lost with season 1 among all the other girls, but also just no one had a chance to really be a character.
Right.
But I think especially here, I think someone as in all of their cases, I think they're all so talented and so funny, and now they all have space to play
and to play off of each other.
Right. And we get mostly Tootie and Natalie and mostly Jo and Blair, but occasionally we get some crossover. I always like the way the Tootie and Blair dynamic is represented, because it really does feel like older sister, younger sister.
Yeah, 100%.
And then Natalie and Jo,
they seem to relate to each other really well.
Well, because they're both from the city.
Yeah.
And even though they're from different boroughs, I think there are a couple of kids who grew up in the city and now they're at this private school. And Natalie's experience is not nearly as rough as Jo's.
Right.
Because Natalie's dad is like a doctor and they don't really struggle as a family the way that Jo's mom has had to, work double shifts as a cocktail waitress to put her through school. But yeah, I think there's certain areas where they all kind of line up in different ways that I think is really sweet. We'll learn, later, or I guess we learned this in season 1 and then we'll see it again, that, Blair is an artist. Her mother's an artist. So, Natalie and Tootie are Natalie is a writer and Tootie is an actor. So like the art-minded, creative-minded people sometimes like it. Yeah. I'm getting really granular right now. Overall, we now have this introduction. Even with Mrs. Garrett, we're going to be able to have some conversations with her. And so we're going to continue to move through like sitcom territory where we are looking at situational comedic episodes, but they get to, I think, be a little more enriched.
Do we want to talk about the subtext in this episode, aside from what we've kind of already covered?
Let me frame this. All right. So everything we've talked about has been the way the episode, what you see. And I don't think that it really extends out beyond that if you're talking about like perceived queer subtext, because I think it is all just like how they are relating to each other. And even without the queer subtext goggles on of being like, what's going on between these two? They are playing a game of heterosexual chicken.
They literally are.
They are saying, I like men and I can get men. Watch how I can get men in these absurd contexts.
And it's like ways that neither of them ever pursue men at any other point in the series. This is something just for them.
They're trying to one up each other to prove something.
Yeah.
And in the narrative context, what are they trying to prove other than I'm coming into your space? Is this a demonstration of how to be a woman of strength in this era? To say, look, I ride a motorbike. I can get any guy I want. Versus, do you like my
oh yeah, it was really good. It was really good.
Whereas Blair's like, I'm rich. I can do whatever I want, and I can get whoever I want. I'm beautiful. If you have any question about it, I have all these photographs in my own wallet to look at for myself. I think in the context of this episode, it's about two people meeting. They are polar opposites, and yet they understand each other in a way that they don't mesh with the other two. That scene, even though it's blocking and direction, they come into that dining room, they are in sync. But that's also, we're the two older girls, and those are the two younger girls.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
We are, we're 15 or 16, and they're 13 and 14
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very much like to see them bracket off in those ways, which is what happens when you're that age.
Yeah, 100%.
When you're a high school kid and that switch that happens of like, oh, I'm going to be freaking nasty to you. Oh, but hold on. Someone else who's in some way inferior. I'm not saying I think that they think that the other two girls are inferior, but they're younger.
Right.
They are younger.
So of course they won't be included in the same way.
Yeah, we're doing something on our own and it's for us because we're older and we're talking about men. They're children.
Yeah.
You're all children.
Yeah. Well, it is also just like that scene alone where they're so in sync is also just testament to the fact that these two actresses had chemistry right off the bat. And obviously that chemistry can look different to different people depending on your interpretation, but it's there. Like, they get each other as actresses as well.
Yes.
And that's really fucking cool.
And that's what I was kind of getting at about when I was referencing like Lisa Whelchel now having someone to work off of.
Yeah.
Which is not to say the other people she was working with before or still is working with that at this time, you know, that they aren't good at what they do. It's just that style or performance and how she's shaped that character. Blair Warner needed someone who could kind of step into her space that would intimidate her. And I think that's what it is well, Tootie and Natalie can't intimidate her because they're younger. They're kids.
Yeah.
You know, the other characters from season 1, we don't get to know enough about them really. And even in that first episode that we did, the one with Cindy,
Blair's not intimidated by
she's
her.
not intimidated by Cindy. She's intimidated or afraid of something that she perceives in Cindy, which is that she just assumes she's probably a lesbian because she hugged some other girl and told her that she loved her. That's an internal thing. Whereas with Jo steps in and is like, I don't give a shit. I'm from the Bronx. I got kicked out of this place or I did this and I don't care. I don't want to room with you. I got a dirty hand. I got electrical tape on my belt. I'll wear last year's clothes. I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. I don't care about any of this. I'm only here because I told my mom I would come to school and I respect my mother. Like, that's the person that Jo Polniaczek is. And that's something that Blair doesn't quite understand. And that scares her because
it gets under her skin.
But I don't think that Blair is ever afraid of Jo. But I think she doesn't know how to deal with someone who isn't amazed by her wealth or taken by her beauty. And Jo doesn't give it. She's like, I don't care.
Right.
I drove over Mrs. Garrett's flower bed.
And I don't even care. I thought they were weeds.
Don't make fun of my name.
Yeah.
I just think it is the introduction to this perfect match of characters,
Yeah.
however you see them.
The only other thing I had in terms of subtext was we have handshakes in this episode that are meaningful because there's Tootie's handshake with Arnold, which to him is something that means so much to him that he's not even going to wash his hand. Yeah. That means something to him. And then we have 2 handshakes with Jo and Blair. There's one that's more of a joke when, you know, Blair walks around with a dirty hand for the rest of the scene for some reason. But then they have their genuine handshake, which is when Mrs. Garrett sees them. And I just think it's an interesting parallel to have Arnold be obsessed with Tootie and get the handshake, and then to have these two with the other parallel of a handshake.
And I also am thinking about even the mud or grease handshake that if we want to get like literary.
Get literary, do it.
Literary, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's too late in the night.
Metaphorical?
No. When you do, it's not context. It's not comprehension. Thank you. Oh. It's the thing I would suck at, that like when you'd like, they'd be like, read this 2 paragraphs from a very famous novel and tell me what this means. And I'm like, you gave me 2 paragraphs of like a Robert Louis Stevenson novel. I don't know why the shirt is red. It probably told you 30 pages ago. What does it mean? I don't care. I didn't like it.
I can tell.
Anyway, but in this case, Jo and Blair shake hands for the first time. Blair gets dirty on her hand is dirty. Her hand is now marked in some way, and she can't stop looking at it.
And she doesn't wash it.
Well, yeah.
Well, she does eventually.
Eventually she washes. But I mean, even that of like, she's been impacted. She met Jo and she was never the same. That's a big jump. That's a big statement. But what I mean is like, you meet someone sometimes and like, I'm assuming it's probably engine grease or something from the bike.
Yeah, probably.
Or maybe dirt from the thing. But I think this thing of like, this person has touched me and I don't know what to do about that. And I think that is something.
I agree.
Really profound. That's something. Anyway, yeah. So I think there's going to be a lot of those moments where we're going to see something that was just a little, it's so hard to know. It's 40 some odd years ago to look back on something and say, okay, what was happening in the moment? What was decided? What is meant to be a joke? What is meant to be this? But what's fun about this kind of analysis and something that I love about media, and particularly looking at subtext in media as someone who had to grow up in an era where we didn't have a lot of queer programming or really any until I was at least an older teen. To look at things and then look at them in retrospect and say, okay, I saw myself here. Why?
Right.
And I see this here and why. So I think that is something to take note of. And again, there was another mirror shot. We talked about this in the roughhousing episode where, you know, they're both looking in that mirror together for that brief moment where they're agreeing. You know, we bring them together into one shot, and it's a reflective moment.
And then they're studying opposites.
Yes. I think it's easy to kind of walk on either side of the line of like, well, that's just how they shot it. Or here's all this deep subtextual meaning to it. But I think there's crossover there, which is that the people who make these shows worked on so much wonderful and great television and media. So these aren't people who are just going to make arbitrary choices for no reason. And so I think that's worth thinking about in looking at this as well, which is, it can go either way when you're kind of playing this game. But the short of it is there's definitely, I think, some metaphor there.
Yeah.
And if the metaphor is just sometimes you meet someone who you don't think you're going to have anything in common with, and they're going to become probably the most important person in your life.
Right.
Or at least this part of your life. And that can be taken any number of ways. I choose to see it as perhaps sometimes you meet a person and it's romantic.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's in the text. Boy, is there a lot to go off of that. Down the
Agreed.
road. But at least here we've had these two, they've met, they've tried to outdo each other on this quest to find men, and all they did was find a cop who's going to arrest them. And I guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens to them on the next episode.
Which would be The New Girl Part 2. What?
What an innovative title.
Yeah.
Oh, Cooper's here. He knows the episode's about to be over. Hi, buddy. That's our cat.
He has lots to say.
He likes to be vocal. Oh, and he's trying to sit on my lap. Buddy, you have to wait. You can find us on Patreon and Instagram, Eastland to Langley, EASTLAND, number 2, Langley, LANGLEY. It's in the notes. Should be linkable right there. Click on it. You can send us an email at eastland2langleypod. That's Eastland, the number 2, langleypod, POD, @gmail.com. We should be on all the major podcast platforms. And I think that's pretty much all I have here. Again, our Patreon feed will be once a month, the season 1 episodes until we get through those, then we'll pull some other things. So go there right now for free. You can listen to the first episode, no cost to you. My cat is on my lap, so I guess that means it's time to say goodnight. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
And we'll see y'all next time. No, we won't. You will hear us.
There you go.
That's what it is.
When I just park it on Blair's face.